All right, guys. So Jon Stewart went on his podcast and spoke a little bit about the Supreme Court and the Roe versus Wade decision and some of the other decisions that have come down. And he went Insky. So Jon Stewart says the Supreme Court is the Fox News of justice. Comedian Jon Stewart blasted the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe versus Wade on his podcast Thursday, arguing that the ruling was based in ideology rather than constitutional reasoning. In my mind, the idea that this was based in any kind of reasoned debate or philosophical education, the Supreme Court is now the Fox News of justice in my mind, Stewart said on an episode of The Problem with Jon Stewart. It is a cynical pursuit in the same way that Fox News would come out with, "We're fair and balanced," under the patina of what would be a high-status pursuit to the betterment of society and journalism. They are a cynical political arm, the comedian argued. Look, this is a point that I've made a number of times as well. People on the right like to pretend that, no, we're not legislating our personal opinions. What we're doing is implementing an objective judicial philosophy, where we say, I'm all about originalism, baby. I just read the Constitution and I implement it as it was intended. That's what they say. But that's utter nonsense. They have a set of political positions, and they work backwards from their conclusion. And so they find any sort of legal rationale or justification they can come up with, a constitutional rationale or justification, and then they pretend, no, we're holier than thou, we're above that, we're above the fray, we're bastions of reason and objectivity, and we just happen to come to conclusions that are in line with a very standard right-wing political agenda. So, and Jon Stewart's calling bullshit on that. He's like, no, I see what you're doing here. This is like when Fox News says we're fair and balanced, but then all they do is bash Democrats and defend the Republican Party. This is the same thing with the Supreme Court. They're not above the fray by any stretch of the imagination. Stewart went on to criticize the process by which justices are confirmed, which involves nominees going through rounds of televised questioning by the Senate Judiciary Committee. Conservative justices Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett, who all voted to overturn Roe, have been criticized for dodging questions about the landmark 1973 decision or saying they regarded it as an important precedent during the confirmation process. Quote, when you look at the ridiculous kabuki theater now of justice confirmation, where they can just go out there and just fucking lie, like if this were about debate, then they would have understood what perjury meant, the former Daily Show host argued. But they are now the Fox News of justice. I mean, there is no consistency. States can't regulate guns. They ruled something similar to that in New York. But they can regulate uteruses, you know? Stewart continued by referencing the Martin Luther King Jr. quote, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Quote, I think the thing that struck me was, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice, right? And I think we're all sort of steeped in that ethos. What you don't realize is there's a goodly amount of individuals, who are trying to bend it back. That was Crystal's point, and I think she nailed it. Maybe it's just not true that the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. Maybe that's not true. Stewart's comments come amid a strong backlash from Democrats and abortion rights advocates following the Supreme Court's decision in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, with recent polling showing that a majority of Americans are concerned the ruling will be used to overturn their other rights. Yeah, I mean, Clarence Thomas said it. He said, look, we should revisit the case which legalized sodomy federally. We should look at the case that legalized contraception federally. We should go back and look at Obergefell, which legalized gay rights and gay marriage federally. And the one he left out was Loving versus Virginia, which is curious because Loving versus Virginia legalized legalized interracial marriage throughout the country. Previously, states could ban it if they wanted to ban it. Weird. Clarence Thomas didn't bring that one up. I wonder why. Could it be because he's in an interracial marriage, so his rights he's not going to put on the chopping block, but everybody else is still put on the chopping block? Oh, that's right. That's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is with Clarence Thomas. So, yeah, make no mistake about it. In my opinion, a plain-faced reading of the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment would mean that Roe versus Wade was a reasonable decision. They also recently threw out an important precedent on what's called the Lemon Test, which is about separation of church and state, how the government cannot promote religion or inhibit religion. So they basically took the Establishment Clause of the Constitution and threw it out the window and said, yeah, if you're a football coach, if you want to pray after the game, even with the students at the 50-yard line, yeah, you should totally be allowed to do that. So a representative of the government can lead the students in prayer, and that doesn't violate the Establishment Clause, that doesn't violate separation of church and state? Of course it does. So Stewart's point is, and he's 100% correct, don't buy this nonsense, this masquerading as like, no, we're just the serious people making the serious decisions based on, the evidence and originalism. No. Their interpretation of the Constitution is just as political as anybody else's, because everything is political. So don't let them get away with that shit. And unfortunately, like I said, we're in a new Lochner era with the Supreme Court, and the decisions are going to get worse and worse. We just saw with the EPA. They said you can't regulate carbon emissions under the Clean Air Act. The Environmental Protection Agency can't regulate carbon emissions under the Clean Air Act. Think about that. They're going to nitpick the regulatory state into oblivion and basically stop any sort of governance. So unless you pack the court or change the nature of the way the court works, then it's sort of a wrap, isn't it? You absolutely have to change the nature of the court. One great idea that was floated is in order for judicial review, to require a unanimous decision. I think that's a good idea. Another thing you could do is make exceptions to the filibuster to codify Roe versus Wade, to codify gay rights and gay marriage. Do something. But it looks like they ain't going to do much. Ever since Adpocalypse, when YouTube defunded all independent news and politics overnight, we haven't trusted them. We know they can pull the rug out from underneath us at any time. If you enjoy this content, please consider tipping $1 or $2 per month on the Secular Talk Patreon. Link in the video description box below. Thanks for your support.